Good morning, everybody. We will close our annual meeting with the extraordinary panel discussions this morning. And Hala Kourani will take over in a moment. But this is for me an opportunity just to summarize from my point of view what has happened this week. And I would do it in the following way. And related also to the theme of this morning, the future. When we look at the future, we all know, and we have seen it this week, we have tremendous challenges ahead. On the other hand, the mood was very, or I should say, moderately optimistic, because we have many, many opportunities ahead. Now, there are four types of persons. There are those who are without responsiveness of what's happening in the world, not concerned. And I think they will have big surprises. Then you have those who have a pessimistic responsiveness. The people who see only the threats, the challenges, and they will be so overwhelmed that they will not be capable to deal with the whole complexity of our world and all the threats and risks we face. And then you have those who have the optimistic responsiveness, who see only the opportunities, but also those people with a lot of positive energy will have those surprises. Because if we do not address the challenges, one day, even the greatest opportunities will not be enough to guarantee our continuation as humankind if we look at climate change, terrorism, poverty, and so on. And then you have what I call now the Davos man and woman. The Davos man and woman is aware of all the challenges. And in a pragmatic way, they do whatever they can to mitigate the risks and to address the challenges. But at the same time, the Davos man and woman is a person who also sees the opportunities in our world and develops a lot of positive energy, not only to use the opportunities, but to address the challenges. And you have been formidable Davos men and women. Thank you.
This is a great honor for CNN and in collaboration with the World Economic Forum to host this closing plenary session. My name is Hala Kourani, anchor at CNN International, and we are all here to learn from our distinguished panel and look toward 2008 as the big challenges that confront us all of humanity, are addressed and solutions are potentially discussed. We have Wang Jiaju, he's the CEO of China Telecom, Indra Nooyi, the chairwoman and CEO of PepsiCo. Thanks for being with us, all of you. James Dimon, the chairman and CEO of JP Morgan Chase. Tony Blair, the former UK Prime Minister and currently the envoy for the so-called Mideast Quartet. Again, a pleasure to have you. Elie Wiesel, an internationally renowned academic, a Nobel Prize winner, author of more than 40 books, and Holocaust survivor. A great mind. Thank you so much, and an honor to be with you today here, sir. Daniel Yergin, an author and a specialist in energy and oil. Such a big topic for all of us in the economy, because perhaps energy more than anything else affects every single one of us on this planet. KV Kamath as well, chairman of ICRC, a Indian banking group. Thank you for being with us. India and China, we have you both facing each other because this and a topic regarding these two countries are on everyone's mind as well. Now, I need to tell everyone that this is also a television program. So it will air tonight at 11 p.m. Central European Time, which is why every once in a while I might move the discussion themes along, perhaps a little bit more quickly than we would if we were simply having a panel discussion. I also need to tell you that audience members can participate by submitting written questions, which will be collected by our producers throughout the hour. We will then select a few, and you will be able to come up to a microphone and ask a question. Also, we will have a recital, a moment of musical harmony at the end, so I ask our audience members, once we're done with the discussion, to stay seated. Now we're going to start right away. We've divided this show into several themes, the first one being fears of a global economic recession. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Diamond. Are we entering a global economic recession, and if so, what should we do to try to avoid it?
So let me just start by saying I don't know, and I don't think anyone knows, and there are a lot of pluses and minuses, and obviously there's been a slowdown. Two things I think people have to keep in mind. Throughout history, we've always had cycles. People shouldn't be surprised. There's always different reasons. There are things to be learned and lessons. But I think the second thing is maybe more important, is this global economy has, in the last 10 or 20 years, most economists would tell you it's taken 2 billion people out of poverty. I mean, we have a chance to do amazing stuff. The cycle will turn one way or the other. And I also think, by the way, the central banks are doing all the people involved are doing a great job trying to mitigate whatever the effects are of this downturn.
All right, Indra Nuri, you are a global company. You sell Pepsi Cola products all over the world. Looking forward to 2008, are you concerned?
We sell Pepsi Cola, Tropicana, Gatorade, Quaker Oats, all of it. Are we concerned about 2008? Not really, because exactly as Jamie said, I think the world is really global, and the great powers of China, India, and the many Asian economies have really come up over the last few years. And I think this is going to be the first test where we're going to see if the engine of growth for the world is only the United States, right, or has the balance of power actually shifted to become even more evenly distributed around the world. So I'm quite optimistic about the situation. Will we have a slowdown? Maybe. But let's wait and see, and let's not get too pessimistic.
All right. I'm going to go to the other side of the panel, Mr. KV Kamath. There's been a lot of talk about so-called decoupling. In other words, is the United States now the only engine for growth, or will India and China be able to grow while the United States and the rest of the Western world slow down? What is your opinion?
Decoupling is just starting to happen. I think it's early days yet. China showed the way, and there is a huge momentum in that country. I think India has followed suit, 9–10% growth, and nobody talks of a slowing down just yet. And I'm sure the rest of the BRIC countries will follow suit, or keep pace, or go ahead in this year and the coming years. So the decoupling has started, but I think the US is still center stage. Maybe it has shifted slightly, but it has not gone off stage.
But if you say this, and if what you say happens, this is truly the beginning of a new era for humanity, isn't it?
Indeed, indeed. As a professor yesterday was chatting with me, he was putting it in context. He says 300 years later, when we look at this period of time, we will say this is like an industrial revolution that took place a few centuries ago, when the world history got rewritten. Maybe we are seeing the start of it, but I don't want to run ahead of time, as it were.
So we may be witnessing and living an exceptional moment in history. Mr. Elie Wiesel, when you look throughout history at moments of economic depression, how do they impact conflict and ethics?
Usually in history, economic depression does bring crises. First crisis of faith. People have no more confidence. And who are those people? Those who need confidence. The poor, the sick, the weak, those who have no voice, and nobody cares about them. But I hear today, for instance, I heard throughout the whole Davos conference speaking about the recession, the fears of recession. I am much more modest. I think about Darfur. How does it affect Darfur? How does it affect the people in Tibet, people in Gaza? Of course, you are in charge of higher and more important issues. The whole world. I don't think of the whole world. I'm a teacher and a writer. It's the one reader who reads me is important to me. The one student in class who listens to me is important to me. So I leave these very important issues to my fellow panelists.
Well, we certainly very much appreciate your contributions and what you have to say about it, because I'm going to turn my attention now to Tony Blair. You're the envoy for the Mideast Quartet. This is probably the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, one of the most protracted conflicts in the world in the last half century. What can economic development do to try to alleviate it?
It can do a lot, but it can't substitute for a political agreement. So there's no doubt at all, I mean, for the Palestinians on the West Bank or Gaza, if the economy is moving, if there's economic development, then the politics becomes a lot easier. By contrast, if there isn't, if the people are poor and miserable, then it's a lot harder to make the politics work. So the things are absolutely interrelated there. Now, actually, there is a certain amount of movement on the West Bank, not nearly as much as there needs to be, but the economy is growing again there. But in Gaza, obviously, it's a terrible situation.
Mm-hmm. Now, I need to ask also about the housing issues, because this is something that's infected the whole world. What happens in the United States still, even though we might be witnessing decoupling, is having an impact all over the globe. James Diamond, how much of an issue and a concern is the subprime mess, as it's been termed?
Well, you know, it's really, think of it as there was a housing bubble in the United States. The bubble burst and subprime was the first casualty. And it's kind of infected a lot of other securities. That creates the financial conditions that obviously make the economy worse. I mean, that will cure itself, and in my opinion, it's probably, you know, half done already. Mm-hmm. But it's been damaging. And
half done?
Yeah, probably.
Half solved?
Half solved. I mean, half the problem worked through, recognized, et cetera. And, but I think it's the same thing as saying it's one of the factors which is making the economy weak.
Right.
That high oil, financial conditions, fear of slowdown. And I think as a policy matter, there are obviously legitimate things that went wrong that, you know, policy folks and regulators should look at and fix for the future.
All right. I really hear a lot of optimism. I'm going to ask you, Mr. Janju, you have reasons to be optimistic. You add millions of subscribers to your service every single month. And this is the kind of number that would make any Western telecom CEO just fantasize for days. What do you see the future for 2008 for you, for China?
Yes, I'm optimistic about the future. You know, 2 and 3 years ago, when we came to Davos, many people asked a question: how the high growth of China and India affect other countries? And some people thought it brought a threat. Some people thought it brought a lot of opportunities. But this year, when I came here, I was asked another question. What will be the affection if the economic growth of India and China slow down because of the world recession? And my answer is, if there is the recession in the world, generally speaking, it will go impact on China. But I don't think it is very big, because in China, 3 major drivers for economic growth. The first is export. Second, the capital investment. The third is consumption. Although there will be a reduction of export because of recession, we still have a very, very strong domestic consumption. And take an example of telecommunications. We now have 370 million subscriber base, and every month we get 6 million net addition to our subscriber base, and most of them from rural areas.
Sure, so demographics are working in your favor. Daniel Yergin, I want to ask you about the price of oil. Hot topic. You don't think the oil age is over? Do you think it'll impact growth negatively this year?
I think at high levels, I think at $90, $100 a barrel prices, as Jamie said, that is one of the factors, along with housing and other factors that push the economy down. But I think that the high prices that we've seen, 50, 60, 70, was actually a representation of what we've been talking about, which is the success of globalization. economic growth. 2004, Asia started consuming more oil than North America. So it's been a sign of success in the global economy, but at some point it becomes a burden.
All right. And also it's important to note that the contribution of oil to overall growth is much lower today than it was 30 years ago, isn't it?
Economies, take the United States economy, uses only about half as much oil for every unit of GDP. But overall, when you do look out, we are looking at this very big challenge. The type of growth picture that's here still means that the world might be using 25 years from now 50% more energy. The question is what kind of energy, how efficiently, and how clean, and that goes back to the kind of challenge that Dr. Schwab was talking about.
Right, and we're going to discuss the environment as well, so intimately linked with oil. Let's now move on to the discussion of conflict resolution, war and peace, intimately linked as well with business development, because peaceful environments favor peaceful business development. Business deals favor interfaith and intersectarian understanding. Let me start with you, Tony Blair, on this topic. As the envoy for the Mideast Quartet, how do you see 2008? George W. Bush, who was your very close ally while you were Prime Minister, says he believes there will be a Palestinian-Israel deal in the next 12 months. Do you agree?
It's possible. It can be done.
It's always possible, but do you agree?
I think the most important thing to understand about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which I didn't really understand until I took on the role as envoy, even though as Prime Minister I've been going there for 10 years. And this may sound absolutely counterintuitive and surprising to people, but actually the terms of an agreement are not the toughest challenge. You could take 5 well-educated Palestinians and 5 well-educated Israelis, and you could put them in separate rooms and ask them to come up with what they roughly thought is a deal, and I promise you they would come up with what would be a very, very major overlap in terms of what they agreed. That's not the problem. The problem is this, actually. The problem is that on the ground, Israel's preoccupation with security and the effect of the occupation on the Palestinian territories creates the circumstances in which what is happening on the ground is contradicting the movement for political progress. In other words, unless you can find a way where Israel meets its security concern and the Palestinians progressively can have the occupation lifted, you will find a situation where even if the politicians are working for a deal, the people are saying, well, this is just unrealistic, this is not what we feel. I mean, if you're a Palestinian living even in the West Bank at the moment with all the restrictions on access and movement, it's hard for you to think you're going to be running this as a state. If you're an Israeli and you've been through the early years of the Intifada and with all the people that were killed then, and there are still rockets coming from Gaza aimed at Sderot in Israel, you know, you find it hard to believe that there can be a lasting peace deal. So my point is this: the absolute key to resolving this is to continue the political process, and President Bush is right. You could have a deal within the year. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I think it's perfectly feasible to contemplate that. But it's only going to happen if the facts on the ground also change. If you get Israel with greater confidence that the Palestinians can take on their security, and the Palestinians with greater confidence that Israel will lift the burden of occupation. If those two things don't happen, you'll find a situation where there is a collision between a political discussion and the actual reality.
And the realities on the ground. Elie Wiesel, do you agree with that? Why has this situation between Palestinians and Israelis not been resolved for so long? Why not?
I would like to be a prophet, although it's a very dangerous business. You know, no prophet has died a natural death. But I am much more optimistic. When it comes to the world, the choice is between being a smiling pessimist and a laughing optimist. I'm a smiling pessimist. I'm convinced, really, deeply convinced, that we are going towards a resolution this year.
This year?
Yeah. And we will meet again next year, and you will say either I was wrong or right. But I'll tell you why. Because first of all, this is it's a long war. There was a 100-year war, which lasted 115 years, by the way. Who's counting? You know? Then a 30-year-old war. This is a 60-year-old war. And it happens that both sides are tired. Literally, both sides are tired. enough to go to funerals, enough tears, enough sorrow. Also, there is practical thing. We have, for the first time, 3 important individuals who are interested in a solution. It is Ehud Olmert, for all kinds of reasons. Abbas, again, all kinds of reasons. And President Bush, for reasons that we know. But and together, and of course together with Tony Blair now who will help, I am convinced we are going towards a solution. How long it will last, I don't know. But why go further? Even one day of peace is better than a week of war. So I think we are there. I'm optimistic. It comes to world situations, I'm less optimistic.
All right, let me ask one of our corporate leaders, Indra Nooyi. You're originally from India. So conflicts there exist, and that part of the world exists. They're interfaith, they're intersectarian in many cases. What can business do to try to alleviate tension when it comes to conflict, territorial wars, and disagreements of that nature?
First of all, separation of religion from the workplace is a critical part of this whole discussion, because I think companies should not get involved in all of these religious issues. That's my perspective. We should stay out of it, and we should keep it out of the workplace.
But what can business do to favor understanding and reconciliation, even in some cases?
I think what we can do within our companies is promote an inclusive environment. Inclusion not just in terms of making sure people of different ethnicities or cultures come together, but people from different faiths come together and have a constructive dialogue about understanding each other's faiths. That's the most we can do in the workplace.
Now, Mr. Diamond, let me ask you this, because in the financial services industry, you have a big center in the Middle East, Dubai, the Emirates. When you look at that center, what does that tell you about what the power of money can do to create a peaceful environment? Or is this just being too money hungry and not looking at the philosophy of it all?
So let me put in the big picture first, because I'm a chairman of a company, but I'm a human being. And I applaud what Tony's doing in people, humanity, life and death, taking care of people. It comes way before all business. So that's number one.
But can't they intersect?
That number two would be if you run a healthy, vibrant company, because people forget that. You know, you destroy some of these companies, we can't do anything. Healthy, vibrant, we can give people jobs. You know, and I know I speak for a lot of companies. We give away $100 million a year. We help inner city school kids get jobs. We gave $10 million in the tsunami. We're every community around the world. We train people, we move people. When we started an operating center in India, we now move a lot of those Indians to America. And I think commerce does bring the world closer, and it creates the things that create an environment to lead to world peace. But I'm not going to sit here in front of everybody and say that business itself is the thing that's going to do that.
No, but it's a part of it, right? Yes, but KV Kamath, I need to ask you this, because in India, financial services are very important in lifting people potentially out of poverty by giving them the kind of loans that allow them to be self-sufficient.
Indeed. Crisis is not necessarily only out of religion. I think crisis also happens when you have a divide, a have and a have-not divide. And in India, we look at 600 million people living in 600,000 villages who I would call are unbanked. Unbanked in a very broad context. They do not have the facilities to create sustenance and wealth for themselves. I think our challenge is if we can reach out, not as CSR, but as a business proposition, a win-win proposition, where they are able to leverage whatever assistance we give into gainful employment. I think you are then addressing the cause of, I think, violence, the cause of future disruption at the root. And I think that is our next big challenge. And we have looked at it as an opportunity. We say that's our next growth horizon. It may take us 5 years to execute, but we are hard at it. And today, the advent of technology, particularly communication technology, gives us that link into the village and into maybe the hands of the customer, which just 5 years back did not seem possible. The only way to have banked 600 million people in 600,000 villages would have been to set up a branch, and that would have been dead on day one because that's not a viable model. But the advent of technology makes this possible. And I think what we have to learn is how do we mesh all these things into something worthwhile.
And Mr. Kamath, I'm sorry to interrupt, but and before we move on to energy, oil, and we're going to be speaking to Daniel Yergin about that because it has an impact not just on the economy but on war and peace, as we all know. But Mr. Janju, let me ask you this. Technology. How has technology changed China and India, as Mr. Kamath just pointed out, in a way that is so fundamental that we might see both of your countries overtake Western countries economically?
Yeah. Yes, you know, we now have bigger coverage of mobile network in China. We cover 97% of people all over China, including some most remote villages. And I think telecommunications are helpful to the reduction of the poor. I'll give you an example. Once I visited a remote village, I saw a farmer was using mobile phone. I asked him, what is the usage for you to use mobile phone? He said, it's benefit me a lot. For example, in the past, he is a vegetable planting farmer. He said, in the past, the price of the vegetable was decided by the middleman. And today, because of the information connection, now the price is decided by the market. So they got a lot of benefits because of technology application.
Right, so this is fascinating. We're going from one type of economy to another in China. What will it create politically, do you think, Elie Wiesel, when the market environment creates a middle class? What happens to the government?
It falls. And it changes. And it does the same thing. It doesn't change. In economy, I think the factors are known. In other areas, they are unknown. And it's very clear, the moment there is a crisis of faith in any sector, we are all in trouble. That is what economy is all about. It affects everybody. And those who decide, therefore, are more responsible than others. Mm-hmm. So the deciders, they will have to sit down and think very, very deeply how they affect people who are not interested in economy, but who are interested simply in living a peaceful life. Mm.
I mean, I think the thing that is most challenging and interesting here is that globalization is a fact, but the values that govern it are a choice. And I think the question will be this, that as all these opportunities multiply and become available to people economically, and in a way economically the world is opening up the whole time, and I personally think that's a great benefit. But I think there is the possibility of a reaction against globalization, even in the Western world, if they think, they look at the rising power of China and India economically and get worried by it. And I think in areas in which I operate, like the Middle East, for example, I think the question will be, and this is where this interaction between cultures and faiths matters, the question will be whether people feel comfortable with all the change that comes with that, or whether they say, no, actually, I want to protect what I have, and kind of close down. That's why I sometimes say to people that in today's world, actually, left and right in politics can be less important than open versus closed. Mm-hmm. There's a real, I think, sense in which these economic opportunities are vast, but people need to know there's a value system that comes with it that opens up the opportunities for everyone. In other words, I think you could find a situation where if we don't judge this situation correctly and, you know, at an international political level, take the right decisions, that people see globalization as something done to them rather than something that, if it is guided with the right value system, actually can bring about a more just world. Mm-hmm. And so I think you've got to combine this economic opportunity with a sense of values that are around notions of justice as well as notions of freedom. And I think if you do that, then people understand the benefit.
But I was wondering, do you think perhaps the reason people are skeptical is because they perceive sometimes the approach of some powerful countries as exhibiting a double standard? In other words, we will strike deals with autocratic countries all day if it makes us money, and then we'll blame others for the same ills when we can't benefit from them economically.
Sure, absolutely. Right? And that's, you know, one of the single things that you will hear most out in the Middle East, which is why the Israel-Palestine issue is so important to resolve, is people say, well, there's a double standard. And you've got to deal with that. And that's why I say, at an international political level, you need stronger and stronger collaborative leadership. And the problem, I think, politically, is that there is now a mismatch, a dysfunction almost, actually, between the amount of collaborative political leadership you require, which is great but not happening, and what globalization is doing economically, which is forcing changes and collaboration upon people in a fundamental way. So you've got a danger that your political track, if you like, and what is needed there gets separated from the massive economic changes that are happening in the world. And actually the need is, as I say, to take globalization as a given, but shape its consequences in a way that's just.
We're going to talk about oil now, energy, food, the price of commodities. This, as we mentioned earlier, is something that each and every one of us is affected by because we all use energy. Daniel Jurgen, it's not the end of the era of oil. You've said this. Why do you say that?
Well, I think, first of all, I just wanted to finish on the globalization issue that the Prime Minister talked about, and when he said it's a fact, it is that globalization is not going to go away, but the question kind of before us is what kind of globalization are we going to have in terms of the values, and he said, and the acceptance. Does it work well? Is there an economic backlash against it? Is there a value backlash against it? And I think that frames the question. So it's what kind of globalization do we have? In terms of oil, you know, it's really, you go back to the question of energy, and you look at population growth, the kind of economic progress. Today, Asia is about 40% of global GDP. Within 20 years or so, it will be more than half of global GDP. That growth, those billions of people coming to the population are going to look at energy. Look what's happening in India in terms of cars or in terms of China. But it's how efficient are we going to use it? There's a lot of focus, of course, on renewables and alternatives. But I'm also struck that the incredibly important role that efficiency has in all of this, and for that probably our role model is Japan, actually, in terms of setting the standard for the rest of the world.
But are we stuck on oil because big business, as some anti-globalization protesters would say, is blocking research into renewable energies? What's the reason?
Well, I think that we have, in a sense, I think everything is open for business right now. I've never seen so much focus on innovation all across the energy spectrum, whether you're talking about conventional energy, whether you're talking about ultra-deep waters, whether you're talking about renewables and alternatives of all kinds. So I think the picture, maybe 5-10 years from now, what we'll have is a more diversified energy picture, and perhaps people will be driving in cars that get 70 miles per gallon. They may be driving in electric cars with batteries or hybrids. I think, if I can just say, even 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, hybrids were sort of this niche. Now you look at the automobile makers, they're all going into it, and it's really seen as an energy management system.
Engineer, what is business's responsibility to keep the environment clean? We all use energy. We all need energy to function. Businesses need energy to produce products and make bottles to put Pepsi, Gatorade, and other products in. What is your responsibility as a business leader to clean up the environment?
I mean, let's go beyond energy and talk about energy, water. Let's talk about all of the issues related to the environment. I think this environmental movement is one of the biggest things happening in the corporate world today. And I think there's an economic reason it's happening, and there's an emotional reason it's happening. Let's talk about the economic reason. Economically, it makes a lot of sense because when you save energy, when you save water, there's more that goes to the bottom line, or there's more available for reinvestment in the business. So it makes good economic sense. So nobody should think that companies that focus on environmental issues, especially being more efficient in energy and things like that, are not doing it out of sense of altruism, but they're doing it because we have a self-interest in making sure that we get the economic benefit of it.
Yeah.
But there's an emotional reason we do it. I think this is the first time people of my age are worried about the next generation. And the reason we're worried about the next generation is because the younger generation have told us that we have to worry about them. And they're worried about the kind of world we're going to leave for them. Today, you cannot hire millennials into the company unless you show that you have a green program. You can't hold on to your employees emotionally unless you demonstrate to them that you have very good environmental programs. So there's an emotional reason which leads to long-term economics, because you need good people to run the company, and the only way you're going to get them and retain them is by having environmental programs. So to me, this whole issue of environment has got a short-term economic issue, an emotional issue leading to a long-term economic benefit.
All right, Mr. Zhangju, in China, there's been a lot of talk about pollution. The Olympics this year, people have said that Beijing is so polluted that some of the runners are having trouble potentially running marathons over there. How worried are the Chinese about the next generation?
I don't think so. You know, the pre-Olympics training in the neighbor countries. It is very usual for any Olympics. And the Chinese government pays much attention for the pollution issue. Even for the company, China Mobile is a telecommunication company. You know, we have two jobs, I think, for this issue. The first, we have to pay attention to the energy conservancy. For example, we started to use the solar energy and the wind energy in our rural base stations. And the second role is we needed to help people to save energy. For example, we now have a project. We use mobile phone to do the remote control of heating system, home heating system. Currently, the home heating system in the north of China work all the day. It is a waste of energy, and we will promote a new project to save the energy for heating.
All right, Mr. Wang, thank you. I'd like to ask Elie Wiesel, because we always appreciate your contribution on every single topic, but how does an environmentally challenged world can change the way human beings interact? Does it have an impact on conflict? Does it have an impact on the ethical environment we live in?
It should. Again, I really believe in the interconnectedness of everything. If the writer sits somewhere in an attic and writes a novel, somehow that writing itself, even before the novel is completed, affects other people who have never read the book, who will never read the book. If there's a play on Romeo and Juliet on Broadway, even those who don't go to the play, somehow they are affected by their drama. That it is not a drama about love, but about hatred. Two families hate one another for reasons they don't even know, and two young people die. So I believe in that. And therefore, whatever I feel simply, whenever the CEOs, whatever they do in economy, they should think, how will it affect other people? How will it affect those who need help, simply? Whatever decision they make, A plus B is C, in the billions, it's okay. But they should always have somebody there, hey, wait a second, Mr. President, or Mr. CEO, how will it affect those people that I don't know and don't buy our product? And we never buy our product. They have no money to buy our product, cars and so forth. So I believe in the whole, whenever you have a problem, it must become universal. Right. I'm not the first one to say it, Kant said it already, and I can only repeat.
Mr. Blair, when Al Gore, the former vice president of the United States, participated in a documentary about the environment, he became a rock star, essentially. I mean, he all of a sudden started appealing to people he couldn't appeal to when he was running for president in 2000. What about the political will behind all of this? What is A, the responsibility of political leaders, and B, their real effectiveness in all of this?
Well, it's not going to happen without a political deal. I mean, you know, let's be clear about it.
Is there real will, though?
There is real will, but, you know, one of the great mistakes, and I haven't been out of office long enough to have forgotten what it was like to be in office. So, you know, I'm still part of the trade union of sort of former presidents and prime ministers or presidents and prime ministers. So, you know, often when people say, well, if you just had some political courage, you could do this. Let's be clear what the climate change leadership challenge is. It's not a lack of will on the part of the leaders, but the decisions that are going to be taken, if we are really going to cut emissions, let's suppose we have a global cut of emissions of 50%, in a world in which China is going to be moving hundreds of millions of people from an agricultural economy to an industrialized economy, and likewise, as was being said earlier, the hundreds of millions of poor Indian people, and they need this economic growth. And China and India will be the first to say, totally justly, you can't expect us not to grow. We need to do this. We are going to have to find the way of the developed world cutting very substantially its emissions and the developing world growing sustainably. But that is a massive challenge. Now, I think actually one of the interesting things for me this week was that I think we now have the right question posed, which is no longer, is this a problem? Should we have a global deal? Do we need a substantial cut in emissions? I think I would describe the global challenge on climate change now very simply in this way, and I think it will come up for the Japan G8 in July, and the Japanese Prime Minister's speech is very important on this. It is, can you design an architecture for a new global climate change deal that has America and China and India in the same deal with different obligations, but nonetheless with obligations, with responsibilities. In other words, how do you match the responsibilities of the world that is already developed and has put all the carbon up there with the world that is developing? And the architecture of that agreement is the key challenge now.
Okay, and can you design that deal?
Yes, I think you can design that.
In the short term, because there's really not much time left.
Absolutely. But no one should underestimate the scale of the challenge. And here's the thing, which you learn when you're in politics, is that the public can have contradictory views and impulses. This is something you can't say when you're still in office, but when you leave office, you can occasionally point this out. You know, it's like, you know, when people say, listen to the people, sometimes the people say two different things, which can be a problem. And what people want is they want a climate change deal, but when we start explaining to people the choices that will really mean, then that's going to be quite a challenge as well. Now, I think we can do it and we can get round it, and actually this is one area in which business and the support of business for tough action will be really important.
Okay, and I was going to say, Daniel Jurgen, when I say we're running out of time, are we running out of time? Because how much oil do we have left?
Or you mean out of time on climate change? Or
out of time on oil exploration and out of time on climate change, that's a given. As Mr. Blair has just said, we've decided already it's a problem. But what about out of time on actually having access to this type of energy?
Well, I think the key question is, as you say, access. There appear to be quite a lot of resources in the world. Technology keeps opening up new horizons, but it gets back to the political questions we're talking about in terms of access, in terms of developing resources in an environmentally responsible way. So I don't think we're looking at an imminent running out of resources, but rather it's these urgent questions of meeting the needs of population. Look at South Africa, their coal mines. Price of gold mines now are shutting down. The price of gold is going up because they don't have enough electricity. This is a really urgent problem and brings home the question of the type of investment and infrastructure. People say that now the International Energy Agency says $22 trillion of investment is needed over the next 25 years to meet the kind of globalization challenges that's here and to do it in an environmentally responsible way. It's a big challenge.
$22 trillion of investment. I'm sure that's interesting to you, that statistic.
It is, yes.
How does a giant financial company such as yours address issues that aren't just within the realms that you're used to addressing, but energy in South Africa?
Right.
Do you look at that?
Yeah, so one is we really do believe we should try to be great corporate citizens. You know, two, in a small way, we are one of the largest investors of wind power in the world. We invest in alternative energy. If you get a mortgage and you have a house which doesn't waste energy, we'll give you a cheaper rate. We're building a new tower in London and a new tower in the United States, which are both going to be platinum green. But I think more importantly is to be involved in the policy, because I think we could say whatever we want, and all these companies can do these things. We need good policy on energy and environment. And you know, just take my country, the United States, we really don't have one. And I agree with Tony. You know, we talk to most Americans about gas prices, and they're angry. They want them down. Now, of course, they have no idea what it costs to get gas out of the ground. They want cheaper cars. They want all these things. And you know, at one point, we need a comprehensive energy, environmental infrastructure policy that will also, if it sets kind of a floor on the price of oil, et cetera, the alternative investing will be enormous.
But Jamie Dimon, whose responsibility is that? Because fundamentally, all of the people here and all of our millions of viewers watching this program know that that's what we need. Right. But then who's in charge? Is it when it's a collective responsibility, does it become nobody's responsibility?
Can I just jump in?
Yeah.
Partly, it's all of our responsibility.
But then it becomes nobody's responsibility.
No, it's not true. It's when, like Jamie says, building a new building or a house, you determine that it's going to be green. You look at those things in front. It's much harder to go back and rebuild all the houses we have now. But when you're building new buildings, whether it's in New York City, whether it's in China or India, there's where you can build for the future. And we need to be building for the future.
And are we doing that in India, KV Kamat?
Starting to happen. Let's look at, sometimes it is imperatives. For example, affordability becomes an imperative, and I'll put it in context. And then a whole mindset change happens. One of our auto manufacturers announced this new car, the Nano. It's not the question of $2,500 for the car. I think when you look at the metric of the car, that car weighs less than half a ton. Whereas most automobiles sold elsewhere could be 1.5 tons, 2 tons. So you are engineering it in a way that is eco-friendly. It gives more than 50 kilometers to the liter, and so on. I think affordability forces you to think of solutions which are friendly. And I think that's the way I would see India growing. Because this is now getting embedded into the minds of people that that's the only way we could change and not go the way the West has gone. And I'm not pointing fingers. That was the way it happened in the past. There's a new path, and that new path will be explored. And I think that will lead to greater understanding and efficiency in usage of resources.
K.V. Kamath, thank you. I'd like to now discuss, and in closing, ethics and morality, because when I said energy really is all of our problem, ethics and morality is even more so all of our problem. Elie Wiesel, whose responsibility is it to make sure the world remains ethical?
Our own responsibility. Everyone must be responsible. There is response in responsibility. The only response to injustice, the only response to poverty, the only response to whatever hurts and blemishes human honor, or the honor of humanity, is responsibility. But Tara, we have not discussed certain things. I have not heard, not only here but before, in Davos, two threats to humanity. The threats. What threatens humanity today? And I believe it is globalization, but a very special aberration of globalization. There is a globalization of fear because of terrorism. We all have conditioned ourselves to fear. 20 years ago, if anyone would have searched me entering an airplane, they would have protested. Come on, violation of privacy. Today we accept it. And if they don't do it, we are worried. Second, which is more important, what about suicide terrorism and fanaticism? I believe these are the real threats hanging upon the next generation. I go into my classroom, I can tell you, I cannot tell, my students don't know it, how I feel about them. I feel a kind of compassion and almost sadness. What kind of world are we giving them? When we live in fear, whether we name it or not, it's fear of the unknown. Today, fanaticism has dominated so many religions, all religions, by the way, including my own. There are fanatics in my Jewish religion which embarrass me. But what about the others and those who use violence? And those especially who use suicide killing. Now, why so many policemen here? It became a fortress. Davos is a fortress. Because we are afraid of suicide terrorists. And that is a question that I don't know really how to answer. In general, what I believe is that whatever the essential question is, education must be its major component. It must. Education must be all over, beginning at home, in the kindergarten, to say that hatred is not an option, nor is despair. Paul Valéry was a great French poet. He said, the future isn't what it used to be. And it sounds funny, but it ain't. Somehow the future today is much more dangerous than it used to be because of people that we don't know, who have a cult of death. And when people practice the cult of death, Mr. Former Prime Minister, I'm sure you have spent sleepless nights about that.
And let me ask Mr. Blair about that, because I hear often when I'm in the Middle East, the reason why there's suicide terrorism is because there is despair and there is poverty. Other times I hear it's the cleric's responsibility, it is the religious leader's responsibility to tell their followers what is the truth about their religion. How does faith play into all of this, Tony Blair?
There's a big challenge, and then there's some good news. The big challenge is that there is this battle for values going on. And actually, I think it is always a good idea to reduce poverty, but I don't think that this is just about poverty. I think it is about the modern world and people's reaction to it. And my view is that you need, in order to defeat this terrorism, yes, you may need security measures, but in the end it is a battle of ideas. And you need a more powerful governing idea than the idea of difference, which is really these people's idea. And incidentally, there are fanatics in every religion. I mean, we know it most because of the problems to do with people who claim in the name of Islam to do these terrible things, but actually there are extremists in most religious faiths, which is why one very important part of this is to try and bring people together, and also to say, in fact, the world of which we're trying to create is a world that is going to be just and fair, and in which everyone has an opportunity, but also a responsibility. And the responsibility is to respect the other person.
Now,
and, you know, if I just, sorry, one last point. The good news is this, because it comes back to the point that Eli was making earlier. The good news about our world today is that idealism is the new realism. And the reason for that is the interconnectedness. Because if we are interconnected, and if the world is interdependent, then actually what happens in one part of the world affects the other, and the only way you can make the world work in those circumstances is to have some common and fair values at the heart of the way the world is led and governed. And that's why, ultimately, you know, we have got no option but to work together, and working together is impossible unless it is on the basis of mutual respect and fairness towards the other person. And that's why I think there is, you know, in the end, look, you know, I'm an optimist by nature, I think, probably. But actually, I am an optimist about the world in which we live today, because I think, ultimately, whatever the struggle and the problem, that necessity, because of our interdependence, to work together will push us towards the right values in the end, per force.
What I hear a lot, and what I heard before coming here, and this is my first Davos, so I've just been fascinated by all the discussions. I've heard, you know, a lot of skepticism. Business leaders are about money. Essentially, they'll go invest in a country, I don't know, like Sudan, despite the fact that people have been deploring the genocide, as it's been called by some, in Darfur, and they don't really care about the ethics. How do you respond to accusations such as that in Genui? How do you respond to accusations that corporate leaders are just not ethical enough?
I think that's a jaded, cynical view of corporations. I would argue that most corporations are what we call the good companies. They're good in the commercial sense, they want to make a buck, but I think most companies are good in the moral sense, because corporations are made up of people who are parents, who are children, who are citizens of the community, citizens of the country. This is not an inanimate entity, the corporation. A corporation has a soul, and corporations are generally good from a moral sense. And I don't believe corporations are unethical. That's a cynical view, and I dismiss it.
Paula, can I add to that? As I've been listening, let the applause add to that. As I've been listening to this discussion, I'm really struck that there is a sustainability ethic that has entered not only the thinking of business, but also the investment of business, and it's become part of the fabric of that. And I think every year, in response to the forces we're hearing about, it has become something stronger, and it is having a very positive effect, whether you're talking about general business practices, whether you're talking about energy, or whether you're also talking about an issue that really emerged very strongly here at this Davos, which is water.
Water, okay. And so we talked about water with you, Ms. Nui. This is a very important, when you look at conflicts around the world, I've noticed this a lot traveling. Conflicts are oil, water, territory, and essentially territory being oil and water as well. So, James Diamond, is that something that you've noticed as well? I mean, I'm coming to you for this, but is that something that you've noticed as well? Because you need to look at the world map as a map of opportunity, as all corporate leaders do. How do you see oil, water, commodities playing into where opportunities can arise for financial institutions and other businesses that you raise money for?
You're way over my head here. You know, first of all, I do think, well, I absolutely agree with you. I think the big corporations, we do everything to do the right thing. Treat people the right way, make up for our mistakes, help our communities, be philanthropic, be environmental, water, in every single which way. And when we go into countries, you know, we generally want to say, we're going to be there forever. And we want that country to look at a J.P. Morgan and say, what a great citizen they've been here. And how they've helped, not just, you know, making money, but how they've helped the communities in all possible ways. And Water itself is just out of my expertise.
All right, well, that's okay. I wanted to ask, and Elie Wiesel, when I knew I was going to have an opportunity to talk to you, I wanted to ask you, in your observations over the many decades that you've been thinking about genocide, about ethics, about conflict, are there economic conditions that favor genocide and conflict? And if so, what are they?
The conditions really are when people cease to respect the otherness of the other. And they want all the people to be alike. All the people to resemble those who cherish, celebrate, and practice dictatorships. To have small dictators. And under Stalin or Hitler, the same thing. It wasn't only one Stalin, there were many Stalins under him. Same thing, many Gauleiters in Germany under him. They want everybody to become with a person with power over other people who would suffer from that power. And therefore I say about education, economy of course is a factor, there's no doubt. If people are hungry, if parents cannot feed their children, I believe their human rights are being violated just for that, and therefore we must help them. Just as I must help a person in prison or in the hospital. And here we come to the major problem. What do we do therefore? What do we do, therefore, to learn from the past? Today is January 27. January 27 has been declared by the United Nations as Holocaust Remembrance Day. We use the word Holocaust because there is no word for it. There is no word for such a tragedy. Language has been betrayed. And what do we learn? That when one community is persecuted or deprived of its hope, all others are affected. It's true that the Jewish people suffered more than others, 6 million Jews, men, women, children. We know, absolutely. But the whole world has been affected. History has been affected. Because it was proven in history that it is possible, just like that. It is possible to try to exterminate an entire people for metaphysical reasons almost, including economic reasons. Now we know that the German killers, and again, I don't believe in collective guilt or punishment, I don't believe in it, but those who killed and their accomplices, they also killed for economic reasons. Goering robbed the artwork, others robbed the banks, they robbed the poverty of the poor. I saw what they robbed in my family. We were not rich. They robbed 2 Sabbath candelabers. Poor. They robbed the poverty of the poor. So that is what we are learning.
And we see it again today in the genocides and the conflicts of today. I would like, and this is coming to a close, it's been a fascinating discussion, but to ask each and every one of you for 2008 what your hope would be to see happen, something that hasn't happened yet. What would you like to see happen? Whether it's for your business, whether it's for the world, all of humanity, everything that affects us sitting here and beyond. May I start with you, Mr. Wang?
It reminds me of the slogan of Beijing Olympics. One word, one dream. What is the common dream? I think it is to set up a peaceful and harmonious world. All countries, all industries, all corporations should make contributions to this issue.
Ms. Nui?
Hala, I'm going to be extremely specific as that what I'd like to see in 2008. One, I'd like us to have a climate policy coming out of whatever meeting that all of us can abide by and work with. Second, I'd like to see us work on agricultural prices. The current trend in food pricing is unacceptable, commodity prices. We've taken years to get people out of poverty, give them a couple of meals a day when they were only eating 1 meal or less. I think we run the risk of them slipping back to poverty because food prices are escalating much too fast.
All right. Mr. Diamond?
I think if we had peace in the Middle East, it would say something about humanity that would really give us hopes and dreams, and that we've accomplished something that's gone on for a long time. So I think it'd be a wonderful thing to say.
Mr. Blair?
I'd like to see us get the climate change deal or the framework of it. I'd like to see the world recommit to the Millennium Development Goals in a big, big way, and I totally agree with Ilya about education and the importance of it. We could do it, it would make a huge difference. And the third thing is, yes, my own responsibility, I would like to see an agreement that gives us the prospect of a lasting peace between Israel and Palestine, because I do think that would be the greatest signal of reconciliation with which the 21st century could start.
Mr. Wiesel, I know when I spoke with you yesterday, you said, I haven't heard about Darfur here, I haven't heard about Tibet, I haven't heard about these things that affect these pockets of humanity that are victims of violence and other forms of submission. What is your wish for 2008?
Must it be one? Can it be a few?
It can be a few.
To alleviate the suffering in Darfur, which has become the capital of human suffering in the world today. And of course, Middle East peace, absolutely. I really think it's so necessary. It's enough, just enough to see that these two people with ancient cultures should live together with respect for one another. And what I would certainly like is I would like China to open its doors to the Dalai Lama, so I could accompany him to go to Tibet. That would be, I think, a great, great victory over all kinds of things.
Because Mr. Wang is here, I'd like to ask him for a reaction to that.
I said the Chinese government and the people of China will make a big contribution to build a peaceful and harmonious world.
Does that satisfy you, Mr. Wiesel?
No. But I understand your position, really, I understand it. Look, it's better. I know there are negotiations going on now, high-level negotiations between the Tibetan community and China. China is such a great nation, really, such a great continent. It is, as I hear here and we know, it has everything, really. Even a will to continue and to continue its policy of grandeur, its philosophy of grandeur. Why should they care about a small little piece of land, 6 million people, and they don't even want to be independent? The Dalai Lama and I were in Congress in the Rotunda, we spoke, and he said it, I don't want political sovereignty. I don't believe anymore that Tibet should be an independent state. Perfect. All they want really is to observe their religion, their culture, their traditions among themselves. It would be so nice, not only so good, so nice that that should happen.
Thank you. Mr. Jürgen.
I think we've been warned that commodity prices are going to be a big issue in 2008. I think within my own sphere, I'd like to see sustained innovation that will address the energy and environmental challenges that we've been talking about. I vote with Jamie Dimon that success in the Prime Minister's mission and enterprise would be profoundly important for the entire world and would be the #1 objective.
Mr. Kamal?
For 2008, it has to be peace, and I put it this way, where we again start using the word trust and start putting away the word fear. I think if we can get these two out, I think we will see peace.
Trust over fear for 2008. Thank you very much for all of your contributions, your wishes for 2008. This has been a fascinating discussion, a privilege and an honor for us here at CNN and for myself personally to participate in this discussion slash debate sometimes, but it was interesting. Thank you to all, and I hope you have a great 2008.